Hi, welcome to another story. Before we begin, there's something you should know. This story was not created by chance. Every word you're about to hear was chosen with intention. Now, listen closely.
The bailiff called the case like he was ordering coffee, and my mother-in-law rose before he finished. Not because she was grieving my husband, because she was seizing him. She wore black Chanel with pearls Alexander had promised me on our last anniversary. The kind of quiet wealth that makes courtrooms go silent before you even speak. Her posture was perfect. Her makeup was flawless. Her eyes were bone dry. And when she looked at me across that probate court, it wasn't loss I saw in her face. It was victory. Her lawyer slid a folder across the table like he was dealing cards. He wore cufflinks I recognized from Alexander's collection, pieces from the same safe she'd had a locksmith open, while I was still at the hospital signing papers. He didn't say my name. He said the defendant like I was already erased. Your Honor, immediate eviction and transfer of all marital assets to the rightful heir. My mother-in-law's lips curved. Not a smile, a claim. That's when I understood she hadn't come to bury her son, she'd come to bury me. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, you'll want to hear what happened next. Hit subscribe because the story has layers you won't see coming. My name is Celeste Winters. I'm 42 years old. And I'm telling this story 3 years later because sometimes justice takes time to feel real. That Tuesday morning in probate court, I sat alone on a wooden bench that smelled like lemon polish. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Constance Whitmore was 70 years old and she'd spent 7 decades perfecting the art of making people feel small without ever raising her voice. Alexander died on a Thursday. Pancreatic cancer, fast and cruel. 1 month from diagnosis to gone. We'd had 7 years together. Good years. He was 50 when he died, still young enough that his death felt like theft. The hospital called me at 4:17 in the morning. I was there by 4:45. I held his hand while machines beeped their final countdowns. I was still at the hospital when Constance made her first move. She had a key to our house. She used it at 6:30 that morning while I was sitting in a hospital chapel, trying to remember how to breathe. She brought a locksmith, told him there'd been a death in the family and she needed access to important documents. He opened Alexander's safe. She took photographs, took jewelry, took papers, then locked it all back up like she'd never been there. Our neighbor texted me, "Saw your mother-in-law this morning with a locksmith. Everything okay?" Alexander had been dead for less than 3 hours. His body was still warm, and his mother was already dismantling her life. The petition arrived 48 hours after Alexander's funeral. Not a condolence card. A legal filing delivered by process server at 7 in the morning. Constance Whitmore versus Celeste Winters. Motion for immediate transfer of marital assets and real property. Emergency petition for eviction. She was claiming I'd manipulated him, isolated him from family. She used phrases like gold digger and opportunistic second wife and exploitation of vulnerable widower. The hearing was set for the following Tuesday, 6 days after my husband died. Not enough time to grieve. Not enough time to find a lawyer. I wore a navy dress Alexander had loved. Simple pearls. No makeup except concealer because I hadn't slept in a week. I sat on that wooden bench and watched Constance arrive like she was attending the opera. She brought witnesses. Alexander's Aunt Margaret, who'd always resented that I didn't come from old money. His cousin Philip, who'd asked Alexander for loans he never repaid. 3 family members ready to testify that I kept Alexander away from them. All lies. But lies told with the right accent in the right courthouse carry weight. Her lawyer, Marcus Holloway, was 48 and wore suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage. Silver temples. Voice like aged whiskey. The kind of lawyer who makes juries forget they're being manipulated. He opened his briefcase with surgical precision. Each document stacked just so. He was prepared. And I was alone with a folder of bank statements and a marriage certificate. The bailiff called us to order. The judge, Patricia Hartwell, looked tired. Reading glasses on a chain. Coffee mug that said world's okayest judge. She glanced at the docket, at Constance, at me. "Counsel, please present your opening statements." Marcus Holloway stood, smoothed his tie. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of predatory marriage and estate manipulation. Mrs. Winters married Alexander Whitmore 7 years ago, when he was vulnerable after his first wife's death. She isolated him from his family. She convinced him to alter estate documents. And now, with my client's son barely cold in his grave, she seeks to claim assets that rightfully belong to the Whitmore bloodline. We're asking for immediate transfer of the marital home, all joint accounts, and eviction to preserve estate assets." He sat down. Constance nodded once, like a queen approving a decree, and I felt something shift inside me. Not panic. Something colder. Something that had been waiting for this exact moment. I stood up even though I wasn't supposed to speak yet. The judge looked at me. Mrs. Winters. I met Constance's eyes across that courtroom. Your Honor, I'd like to request a brief continuance. There's one more person who needs to be present before this hearing proceeds. But I wasn't as alone as she thought. I met Alexander Whitmore on a Thursday in March, 7 years before that probate courtroom. We were both reaching for the same book at a charity fundraiser in Georgetown. Something about urban planning and sustainable architecture. Our hands touched the spine at the same moment. He looked at me and smiled like he'd just found something he didn't know he was looking for. I'm Alexander, he said. And you have excellent taste in boring books. He was 43. Recently widowed. His first wife, Caroline, had died 2 years earlier from an aneurysm. He told me on our third date, sitting in a coffee shop that overlooked the Potomac. I'm not ready, he said. But I also can't stop thinking about you. So I don't know what to do with that. I appreciated the honesty. He wasn't performing recovery. He was just a man trying to figure out how to live again. We took it slow. Dinner stopped museums. Long walks where we talked about everything except his mother. That should have been my first warning. The way he changed the subject whenever Constance's name came up. The way his jaw tightened when I asked about meeting his family. She won't like you, he finally said 6 months into dating. We were in his car outside my apartment. Rain drumming on the windshield. It's not personal. She didn't like Caroline either at first. My mother believes no one is good enough for her son. And she's especially suspicious of anyone who didn't grow up in her world. I'd grown up middle class in Pennsylvania. Public schools. State university. I'd worked through graduate school and built a career in nonprofit development. Good work. Meaningful work. But not the kind of pedigree Constance Whitmore valued. Not old money. Not country club memberships. Not the right last names and the right social registers. We got engaged after a year. Alexander proposed on a hiking trail in Shenandoah. No audience. No performance. Just him and me, and a simple platinum band that had belonged to his grandmother. He told me his grandmother would have loved me. That she'd always said the Whitmores needed someone real. I said yes because I loved him. Because he saw me as a whole person. We decided on a small wedding. Immediate family only, a judge. A reception at a restaurant Alexander loved. Simple and genuine. Everything Constance despised. She refused to attend. Sent a note on cream-colored stationery with her monogram embossed at the top. Alexander, I cannot in good conscience support this union. You are making a mistake that dishonors Caroline's memory and compromises her family's standing. When you come to your senses, I will be here. Until then, I must distance myself from this decision. Love, Mother. Alexander read it twice. Folded it carefully. Put it in a drawer. He didn't cry. Didn't rage. Just said, I'm sorry you have to see this. Then he took my hand and we went to the courthouse and got married anyway. 12 people total. We had champagne and crab cakes and someone played piano. It was perfect. And Constance's absence felt like a gift. But her absence didn't last. She showed up at our house 3 weeks after the wedding. Unannounced. Carrying a casserole dish like this was a normal family visit. Alexander answered the door. His whole body went rigid. Mother, he said. Not warmth. Not welcome. Just acknowledgement. She walked past him without asking permission. I see you've redecorated. How quaint. Then she looked at me, Celeste. We should talk. The three of us. About expectations. What followed were 7 years of Cold War. Dinners where Constance corrected my grammar. Holidays where she gave me gifts pointed enough to sting. A cookbook for beginners when I'd been cooking for 20 years. A book on etiquette. A gift certificate for a salon with a note that said, they work miracles. Alexander defended me every single time. But it exhausted him. She was his mother. And no matter how cruel she was, he couldn't fully let her go. The tension escalated in Alexander's final year. He'd started feeling sick around Thanksgiving. Fatigue. Weight loss. By January, he couldn't ignore it anymore. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Inoperable. 6 months if he was lucky. He wasn't lucky. We had weeks. Constance wanted access. She called every day. Demanded to visit. Bring him home where he can be properly cared for. Alexander refused. If she comes, you stay in the room, he told me. I don't trust her. She tried anyway. Showed up on a Tuesday afternoon when Alexander was too weak to get out of bed. I was downstairs making soup he wouldn't eat. The doorbell rang. There she was. Constance in cashmere and pearls. Behind her stood a man I didn't recognize. Thin. Nervous. Carrying a leather briefcase. This is Mr. Peterson, Constance said. Alexander's attorney. We need to discuss some estate matters while he's still lucid. She tried to walk past me. I blocked the doorway. He doesn't want to see you alone. Her face hardened. I'm his mother. You're a temporary obstacle. Now move. I didn't move. Alexander's voice came from upstairs. Weak but clear. Celeste, call 911. Tell them my mother is trying to force me to sign documents, and I'm refusing consent. Constance went pale. The attorney turned and walked back to his car. Fast. Constance looked at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, she said. Then she left. Alexander made me promise to never let her in the house again without witnesses. Made me swear I'd protect myself after he was gone. He died 3 weeks later. I held his hand. I told him I loved him. I promised I'd be okay. And I believed it. I believed that grief was the worst thing I'd have to face. I was wrong. Because 48 hours after his funeral, that process server knocked on my door. The judge looked at me after Marcus sat down. Mrs. Winters, do you have representation? I shook my head. Your Honor, I'd like to represent myself, and I'd like to request that we wait for one more person before proceeding. The judge frowned. Who? I glanced at Constance. She was smiling. That thin, satisfied smile of someone who thinks they've already won. Someone my husband made sure would be here, I said. Someone who has information material to this case. The judge checked her watch. You have 15 minutes, Mrs. Winters. After that, we proceed with or without your mystery guest. Constance leaned over to Marcus and whispered something. He nodded. They weren't worried. They had witnesses. They had documents. They had the Whitmore name, and all the power that came with it. And I had nothing. Except Alexander's final promise. I've taken care of everything, Celeste. If she tries what I think she'll try, she'll destroy herself. I didn't ask you to fight. I just need you to wait. When the time comes, wait for the last person. That's when the judge asked me a question I've been waiting for. The judge leaned back in her chair. Mrs. Winters, while we wait for your witness, I'm going to allow Mrs. Whitmore to present her case. Is that acceptable? I nodded. It was more than acceptable. It was necessary. Because every word Constance said, every lie she told was digging her grave deeper. Marcus Holloway stood and buttoned his suit jacket. Your Honor, I'd like to call Constance Whitmore to the stand. Constance rose like she was accepting an award. Slow, graceful. The kind of movement that draws every eye in the room. She wore black Chanel with a silk scarf at her throat. Tasteful gold jewelry. Her hair was silver and perfect. She looked like exactly what she was. Old money, old power. Old certainty that the world would bend to her will. The bailiff swore her in. She placed her hand on the Bible without hesitation. Raised her right hand. Promised to tell the truth. Marcus approached with a legal pad. Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for being here during what must be an incredibly difficult time. Can you tell the court about your relationship with your son, Alexander? Constance took a delicate breath. As if the question itself caused pain. Alexander was my only child. I raised him after my husband passed when Alexander was just 12 years old. We were extraordinarily close. He called me every Sunday. We had lunch every month. He confided in me about everything. He valued my counsel. Marcus nodded slowly. And when did you first meet the defendant, Celeste Winters? Constance's eyes flicked to me. Just for a second. Alexander introduced us about 7 years ago. He'd been widowed 2 years earlier, when my daughter-in-law Caroline passed suddenly. He was vulnerable. Still grieving. Not himself. And then suddenly he was engaged to a woman none of us knew. Someone from a very different background. It happened very quickly. Too quickly for those of us who loved him. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the court reporter's fingers. Marcus let the words hang there. Vulnerable. Too quickly. The implication clear without saying the word predator out loud. And how did Alexander change after his marriage to Mrs. Winters? Constance sighed. Theatrical. Perfectly timed. He became distant. He stopped attending family functions. When he did come, she was always there, monitoring his conversations, steering him away from private discussions with me. He stopped calling on Sundays. When I'd reach out, she'd answer his phone and say he was busy. It was as if she built a wall between my son and his family. I wanted to stand up, wanted to scream that every word was a lie, but I stayed quiet. Let her talk. Let her perform. Because somewhere out there, the person Alexander had sent was getting closer, and every lie Constance told was being catalogued. Marcus picked up a document. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit A. Can you identify this? Constance took the paper. This is a letter I wrote to Alexander 3 years ago, expressing my concerns about his marriage and the changes I was observing in his behavior. And did he respond? Her face fell. Perfect sadness. No. He never acknowledged it. That was when I knew she had complete control over him. The judge looked at the letter, then at me. Mrs. Winters, have you seen this? I shook my head. Your Honor, I was never shown any letter. Alexander never mentioned it. Judge Hartwell made a note. Proceed, Counselor. Mrs. Whitmore, can you describe your son's final weeks? Constance reached for a tissue, dabbed at dry eyes. I tried to visit him, to be there for him in his final days, but she wouldn't allow it. I'd call and she'd say he was sleeping. I'd come to the house and she'd turn me away at the door. My son was dying and his own mother wasn't permitted to say goodbye. The lies were building, layer upon layer. Did there come a time when you became concerned about your son's estate planning? Yes. Constance straightened in her chair. Alexander had always been very clear about his wishes. He wanted the family assets to remain in the family. The Whitmore name has history. Legacy. But in his final months, I learned he'd made changes to his estate documents. Changes that excluded his family entirely and left everything to her, a woman he'd known less than a decade. I tried to discuss it with him, to make sure he understood what he was doing, but she was always present, always interfering. Marcus turned to face the gallery. And what happened when you tried to have a private conversation with your son about these matters? Constance's voice dropped, became softer, more wounded. I came to their home with my attorney, just to review the documents, to ensure Alexander understood the implications. She blocked the door, refused to let us in, and then Alexander, clearly coached, threatened to call emergency services, as if I was some kind of threat, as if a mother's concern was a crime. There it was, the incident from Alexander's deathbed, but told from Constance's perspective, where she was the victim, where I was the villain. Marcus let that statement settle. Then he called his first witness, Aunt Margaret, 75 years old. She took the stand in a lavender suit, confirmed everything Constance had said. Alexander had changed, become withdrawn, stopped attending family Christmas, all after the marriage. Then cousin Philip, 49, unemployed more often than not. He testified that Alexander had loaned him money before the marriage, but refused after. Said I'd told Alexander that Philip was taking advantage of him, which was true. But Philip made it sound like financial abuse. The lies were piling up, each witness adding another brick to the wall Constance was building. Judge Hartwell looked increasingly uncomfortable. She kept glancing at the clock. At me. At the courtroom doors. Mrs. Winters, your witness still hasn't arrived. I'm going to need to proceed. I stood up. Your Honor, just a few more minutes. Please. Marcus objected. Your Honor, this is a delay tactic. The respondent has no witness, no evidence, no defense. She's wasting the court's time. My client has already suffered immensely. She's buried her son. She's been denied access to family heirlooms and assets. She's entitled to swift resolution. The judge looked at me. Something in her expression shifted. Not quite sympathy, more like curiosity. Why a widow would sit quietly through brutal testimony. Why I wasn't crying or protesting. Why I seemed so certain that help was coming. Mrs. Winters, I'm going to give you 5 more minutes. After that, we proceed to judgment based on the evidence presented. Understood. I nodded. Understood, Your Honor. Constance smiled, leaned over to Marcus and whispered something that made him chuckle. They thought they'd won. Thought the judge was about to rule in their favor. Award the house. The accounts. Everything. But I wasn't waiting for a miracle. I was waiting for a plan. Alexander's plan. The one he'd set in motion weeks before he died. The one that required Constance to do exactly what she was doing. Lie under oath. Present false testimony. Because Alexander had known his mother better than anyone. He'd known that given the opportunity, she'd reveal herself completely. I leaned forward and said 5 words that changed everything. Your Honor, I respectfully request we wait for the last person. My voice was steady. Calmer than I felt. Calmer than I had any right to be sitting across from a woman who'd spent the last hour systematically destroying my character under oath. The judge removed her glasses and set them on the bench. Mrs. Winters, I've been patient, but I need you to tell me who this person is and why their presence is essential to these proceedings. Otherwise, I'm ruling based on the evidence before me. I stood up, smoothed my dress, looked directly at Constance, the trust administrator from Hawthorne National Bank. Your Honor. He's been en route from their downtown office. He has documentation that's material to every claim Mrs. Whitmore has made today. Documentation that will clarify the actual status of the estate assets she's attempting to claim. The courtroom went completely still. That particular kind of silence that happens when everyone realizes a script has changed. Marcus Holloway's pen stopped moving. Aunt Margaret shifted in her seat. Cousin Philip leaned forward, and Constance, for the first time since she'd walked into that courtroom, looked uncertain. Marcus stood quickly. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We've received no notice of any trust administration. No documentation has been filed with this court. The respondent is clearly stalling, introducing phantom evidence to delay a straightforward probate matter. I move to proceed to judgment immediately. Judge Hartwell looked at me. Mrs. Winters, do you have any documentation of this trust? Any certification or filing that would give me reason to delay? I reached into my folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper. Alexander had left it for me in a sealed envelope with my name on it. Instructions I didn't fully understand until I was sitting in that courtroom watching his mother perform grief she didn't feel. I handed the paper to the bailiff. He walked it to the judge. She read it once, then again. Her eyebrows rose slightly. This is a notification letter from Hawthorne National Bank's Trust Department, dated 3 weeks before Mr. Whitmore's death. It confirms the existence of an irrevocable trust with corporate trustee and states that a representative will be available to provide testimony and documentation in any legal proceedings regarding the estate. She looked at Marcus. Counselor, did your client disclose the existence of any trust when she filed this petition? Marcus turned to Constance. She was pale. Her hands gripped the edge of the witness box. She started, then stopped. Cleared her throat. I was not informed of any trust. Alexander never mentioned it. This is clearly something she convinced him to create without family knowledge. More manipulation. More evidence of her undue influence. The judge's expression hardened. Mrs. Whitmore, you're still under oath. And you're telling this court that you had no knowledge of any estate planning your son conducted? Constance lifted her chin. That defensive posture I'd seen 100 times. None whatsoever. He was secretive in his final months, isolated from family counsel. If such a trust exists, it was created under duress and should be challenged. There it was. The exact argument Alexander had predicted. The exact overreach that would trigger everything he put in place. I caught myself almost smiling, almost. But this wasn't the time, not yet. The judge checked her watch. It's 11:40-7. Mrs. Winters, if your witness isn't here by noon, I'm proceeding to a ruling. Do you understand? I understand, Your Honor. Thank you for your patience. I sat back down, folded my hands, and waited. The next 12 minutes felt like 12 hours. The clock on the courtroom wall ticked in rhythm with my heartbeat. Constance whispered urgently to Marcus. He shook his head at whatever she was saying, pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, probably texting a paralegal to research irrevocable trusts and whether they could be challenged posthumously. Aunt Margaret and Cousin Philip sat frozen in the gallery. Everyone waiting. Everyone wondering if I was bluffing. At 11:53, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Here. Parking now. 2 minutes. I didn't react. Didn't check my phone. Didn't give Constance the satisfaction of knowing help had arrived. I just sat there, breathing, remembering what Alexander had told me in those final days. She's going to come for you, Celeste. The moment I'm gone, she's going to try to take everything. Not because she needs it, because she can't stand that I chose you over her. So, I've made arrangements. Legal arrangements she won't see coming. When it happens, just wait. Don't fight. Don't argue. Just wait for the last person. At 11:56, the courtroom doors opened. Everyone turned. A man walked in. Late 40s. Black suit. White shirt. Silver tie. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a sealed manila envelope in the other. His face was utterly neutral. No emotion. No apology for being late. He walked down the center aisle with the measured pace of someone who'd done this before. Someone who understood that courtrooms ran on procedure and patience and precise timing. He stopped at the gate separating the gallery from the counsel tables. Looked at the judge. Your Honor, my name is Richard Chen. I'm the Senior Trust Administrator for Hawthorne National Bank. I apologize for the delay. Traffic from downtown was heavier than anticipated. Judge Hartwell gestured him forward. Dobmer. Chen, approach. He walked through the gate, set his briefcase on the table beside me. Didn't look at me. Didn't acknowledge Constance or Marcus. Just focused on the judge with the single-minded attention of a professional delivering information. Your Honor, I'm here in my capacity as representative of the corporate trustee for the Alexander James Whitmore Irrevocable Trust, established on February 14th of this year. I have certification of trust, letters of administration, and documentation relevant to the petition currently before this court. Constance made a sound, not quite a gasp, more like air being forced from her lungs. February 14th. Valentine's Day, 6 weeks before Alexander died. When he was already sick but still mobile, still clear-minded enough to plan, still strong enough to protect me from what he knew was coming. Marcus stood abruptly. Your Honor, I object to this entire proceeding. We've had no opportunity to review these documents. This is ambush testimony designed to prejudice my client's legitimate claims. I request an immediate continuance. The judge held up her hand. Counselor, your client filed an emergency petition demanding immediate relief. You can't now complain about speed when it doesn't favor your position, Dotmer. Chen, I'm going to allow you to present your materials. But I want authentication. I want proof that this trust is legitimate and relevant to the matters before me. Understood. Chen nodded. Understood, Your Honor. He opened his briefcase with precision, pulled out a bound document, blue cover, official seal, handed it to the bailiff who walked it to the judge. And that's when Constance's face went white. This is a certified copy of the Alexander James Whitmore Irrevocable Trust, Your Honor. It was executed on February 14th before a notary public with two witnesses present. Dotmer. Whitmore was represented by independent counsel from Morrison and Hale, a firm with no prior relationship to him or his family. He underwent a capacity evaluation by Dr. Sarah Lynn, a geriatric psychiatrist, who certified that he understood the nature and consequences of the trust creation. All standard protocols were followed. All documentation is on file with the bank and with the Commonwealth of Virginia's Trust Registry. Judge Hartwell opened the document, started reading. Her expression shifted from skepticism to concentration to something that looked like surprise. Marcus tried again. Your Honor, without time to review the specific provisions, we can't possibly respond to whatever claims are being made. This could be a standard trust with minimal bearing on the probate assets my client is entitled to. The judge looked up. Counselor, this trust isn't minimal. According to what I'm reading, it contains substantially all of Mr. Whitmore's assets. The house, investment accounts, business interests, life insurance proceeds. Everything your client is attempting to claim through probate. Constance stood up in the witness box. That's impossible. Alexander would never cut his family out completely. This is fraud. This woman must have forged his signature or coerced him or drugged him or something. I demand a handwriting analysis. I demand an investigation. The judge's voice went cold. Mrs. Whitmore, sit down. You're still under oath and you're dangerously close to contempt. Constance sat, but her hands were shaking. The careful composure she maintained through her entire testimony was cracking. Chen continued as if there'd been no interruption. Your Honor, I'd also like to submit the capacity evaluation, the independent attorney's certification, and video documentation of the trust execution. Mr. Whitmore specifically requested video recording to prevent exactly the kind of challenges we're hearing today. There was video. Alexander had recorded himself signing the trust, recorded himself explaining why, recorded himself with a psychiatrist confirming he was of sound mind. He thought of everything. Every possible argument Constance might make, every possible challenge Marcus might file, and he built a wall of evidence so thick that nothing could penetrate it. The judge looked at me, then at Constance, then back at Chen. Dotmer. Chen, I'm going to ask you directly. Does this trust contain any provisions relevant to the claims Mrs. Whitmore has made today? Chen's face remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been satisfaction if he'd allowed himself to show emotion. Yes. Your Honor, it contains several provisions directly relevant to this proceeding. Most notably, it contains a no contest clause. Judge Hartwell leaned forward. Explain. A no contest clause, sometimes called an interim clause, states that any beneficiary who challenges a trust or attempts to claim assets through alternative legal proceedings forfeits their entire inheritance under the trust. It's designed to prevent exactly what we're witnessing today. Hostile litigation by family members who disagree with the grantor's wishes. The courtroom temperature dropped 10 degrees. I felt it in my spine. In the sudden stillness of the air. In the way Marcus Holloway's face went from confident to calculating to concerned in the space of 3 seconds. Constance was staring at Chen like he'd just spoken in a language she didn't understand. Your Honor, Chen continued. Mrs. Constance Whitmore is named in the trust as a contingent beneficiary. She was entitled to receive certain assets upon Mr. Whitmore's death. However, by filing this petition, by attempting to claim trust assets through probate court, she has triggered the no contest clause. Judge Hartwell set down the trust document and looked at Constance with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between pity and disbelief. Dotmer. Chen, let me make sure I understand what you're telling this court. Mrs. Whitmore was entitled to receive assets from her son's trust. But by filing this emergency petition seeking those same assets through probate, she's now forfeited her right to receive anything. Is that correct? Chen nodded once. Precisely, Your Honor. The no contest clause is unambiguous. Any beneficiary who contests the trust disposition or attempts to acquire trust assets through litigation, administrative proceedings, or judicial action shall forfeit all benefits under this trust, and shall be deemed to have predeceased the grantor. Constance finally found her voice. It came out strangled. Desperate. That's not. She can't. Alexander wouldn't. He wouldn't punish me for trying to protect his legacy. This is her doing. She poisoned him against me. She must have written that clause herself. Marcus put his hand on her arm, a warning to stop talking. But Constance was past the point of strategic silence. Your Honor, my son loved me. We had our differences, but he would never intentionally disinherit his own mother. This trust must have been created under duress, under undue influence. I'm not contesting his wishes. I'm trying to correct a document that doesn't reflect his true intent. Judge Hartwell's expression hardened. Mrs. Whitmore, you filed a petition alleging that your daughter-in-law manipulated your son and claiming that all marital assets should be transferred to you as a rightful heir. That is the textbook definition of contesting a trust. You can't now claim you are simply seeking clarification. Chen reached into his briefcase again, pulled out another document. Your Honor, I'd like to submit the independent attorney's affidavit. Whitmore's counsel Eb Morrison and Hale specifically discussed the no contest clause with him, explained its implications, asked him directly whether he understood that family members might challenge his decisions, and whether he wanted to include protective language. The affidavit includes Mr. Whitmore's recorded response. The judge took the affidavit, read it silently. Her eyebrows rose. Then she read aloud. When asked whether he wanted to include a no contest clause, Mr. Whitmore stated, and I quote, "Absolutely. My mother will try to take everything from Celeste the moment I'm gone. She'll claim manipulation or incompetence or whatever story makes her the victim. I know how she operates. This clause isn't punishment, it's protection. If she truly respects my wishes, she'll accept them. If she doesn't, she'll reveal her true priorities. Either way, Celeste will be taken care of." End quote. The courtroom was silent except for Constance's breathing, sharp and shallow, the breathing of someone whose world was collapsing in real time. Chen, the judge continued, what were the specific assets Mrs. Whitmore was entitled to receive before she triggered this clause? Chen opened the trust document to a marked page. Mrs. Whitmore was designated to receive the family home in McLean, valued at approximately $2.3 million. She was also entitled to receive investment accounts, totaling approximately $1.7 million, and certain personal property including jewelry and family heirlooms, valued at approximately $500,000. In total, her inheritance under the trust was valued at approximately $4.5 million. The number hung in the air. $4.5 million. Constance had just gambled away $4.5 million because she couldn't accept that her son had chosen his wife over his mother. Then he pulled out a second envelope, the one Alexander wrote by hand. Judge Hartwell adjusted her reading glasses. The courtroom felt smaller, suddenly. Closer. She held the letter carefully, the way you hold something fragile and final. To whom it may concern, she read, and if you're reading this in a courtroom, then you already know who that is. Mother, this letter is for you. Though I suspect by now you've stopped listening to anything. That doesn't confirm what you want to believe. I'm writing this on February 15th. Valentine's Day was yesterday. I spent it with Celeste, the woman I love, creating a trust to protect her from you. Not because I hate you. Because I know you. Constance flinched like she'd been slapped. Judge Hartwell continued without pause. I'm dying. The doctors have given me weeks, maybe a month if I'm lucky. I'm not lucky. The pain is constant now, and the medication makes me fuzzy, but I'm clear enough for this. Clear enough to tell you what I've known my entire life, but never had the courage to say out loud. You don't love me, Mother. You love the idea of me. The son who validates your choices and reflects your status and never questions your authority. But the real me has always disappointed you. Because I wanted a simple life. Because I married for love twice instead of strategy. Because I chose happiness over legacy. The words landed like stones in still water. Marcus had stopped taking notes. Aunt Margaret in the gallery had her hand over her mouth. Cousin Philip stared at the floor, and Constance sat frozen in the witness box, tears finally appearing in her eyes. Not the performed tears from her testimony. Real ones. Caroline understood you. She played the game, attended the right parties, said the right things, And you tolerated her because she made me look good. But she was miserable. She told me 3 months before she died that she felt like she was suffocating. That every family dinner felt like a performance she couldn't quit. I didn't listen. I told her you meant well. I chose you over her comfort. And then she died. Aneurysm at 41. And I'll never know if the stress contributed. If your constant criticism helped kill the first woman I loved. I closed my eyes. I'd known Alexander felt guilty about Caroline. But hearing it read aloud, hearing the rawness of it in a courtroom, made it real in a way that private confession never had. When I met Celeste, I promised myself I wouldn't make the same mistake. I told her about you from the beginning. Warned her that you'd never accept her. Never approve. Never stop trying to make her feel less than. And she married me anyway. Not for money or status. She married me because she saw who I was underneath all your expectations. She loved the parts of me you tried to erase. Constance's tears were falling freely now, mascara tracking down her carefully made-up face. She looked older suddenly, smaller. You came to my house 2 weeks ago, Mother. I was so weak I could barely sit up. Celeste was downstairs making soup I couldn't eat, and you walked into my bedroom with a notary. Do you remember what you said? You said, Alexander, we need to fix this before it's too late. Before she takes everything that should stay in the family. You had papers already drafted. Documents that would move all my assets into a trust controlled by you. You told the notary I'd requested the visit. That I was of sound mind and eager to update my estate planning. The judge paused, looked at Constance. Mrs. Whitmore, is this true? Did you bring a notary to your dying son's bedside? Constance couldn't speak, just shook her head weakly. But her denial was useless. The letter continued. I told you to leave. You refused. Said you were protecting me from a woman who'd manipulated me. The notary looked uncomfortable, but you'd paid him enough to ignore his conscience. So I did something I should have done 30 years ago. I pressed the emergency call button on my phone. The one that connects directly to 911. And I said clearly, loudly, into that phone, my name is Alexander Whitmore. I'm at home in hospice care. My mother has entered my house without permission and is attempting to force me to sign legal documents against my will. I'm requesting immediate assistance. Marcus muttered something under his breath. Probably a curse. Probably the realization that his client had lied about every significant fact. The dispatcher stayed on the line. Asked if I was in immediate danger. I said no. But I needed the call documented. Needed proof that you tried this. Because I knew you'd try again after I died. Knew you'd come for Celeste with lawyers and claims of undue influence. So I made sure there was a record. Dispatch audio. Timestamps. Your name and the notary's name. All documented by the county emergency services. Constance was crying openly now. Shoulders shaking. The perfect posture finally broken. But I felt nothing watching her. No satisfaction. No pity. Just exhaustion. Alexander had loved this woman. Had spent 50 years trying to earn her approval. And in his final weeks, he'd had to protect himself from her with emergency calls and legal traps. You left that day. Took your notary with you. And I called my attorney. Set up the trust you're hearing about now. I included the no contest clause specifically for you. Because I knew you'd sue Celeste. Knew you'd try to take the house and the accounts and everything we built together. Not because you need the money. You have your own wealth. But because you can't stand that I chose someone over you. That I loved someone more than I feared disappointing you. The letter was almost finished. I could tell by the way the judge was holding the pages. If you're hearing this, Mother, you've already triggered the clause. You've already lost your inheritance. And I'm sorry. Not because you don't deserve it, you do. But because it means you learn nothing. It means even after I'm gone, even after you've buried your only child, you still chose control over love. Chose legacy over letting go. I hope someday you understand what you've lost. Not the money. That's just paper. But the chance to know the real me. I forgive you. But I won't let you destroy the woman I love. Celeste is my wife. My partner. My choice. And this trust is my final act of love for her. If you're in that courtroom trying to take her home, know that I saw you coming. And I stopped you. Goodbye, Mother. I hope you find peace. Alexander James Whitmore, February 15th. The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Hartwell set down the letter. Folded it carefully. Placed it back in the envelope. Then she looked at Constance with an expression I'd never seen on a judge's face before. Something close to sorrow. Mrs. Whitmore, do you have anything to say? Constance tried to speak. Her mouth moved but no sound came out. She looked at me. Really looked at me for the first time since we've met 7 years ago. And I saw something flicker in her eyes. Recognition maybe. Or regret. Or just the awful realization that she destroyed herself pursuing a victory that was never hers to claim. But the cruelest twist wasn't what she lost. It was who had been recording her the entire time. Marcus Holloway remained standing after Constance left. He should have followed her, should have gathered his briefcase and walked out behind his client. But he didn't. He stood there at the counsel table with his hands flat on the polished wood, staring at nothing. Then he took a breath and turned to face Judge Hartwell. Your Honor, before this hearing concludes, I need to clarify my role in these proceedings. There's information the court should have. Information I was instructed to withhold until Mrs. Whitmore completed her testimony. Judge Hartwell tilted her head slightly. Counselor, what are you talking about? Marcus reached into his briefcase, pulled out a different folder. This one was thicker. Tabbed, organized with precision. Your Honor, my name is Marcus Holloway, and I am an attorney licensed in Virginia and the District of Columbia. But I'm not Constance Whitmore's attorney. I never was. I'm the successor trustee designate for the Alexander James Whitmore Irrevocable Trust. I was hired by Mr. Whitmore 6 weeks before his death with very specific instructions to document everything his mother said and did in pursuit of his estate, to let her believe I was representing her interests while actually recording evidence for the trust administration. The courtroom went completely still. Even the air seemed to stop moving. I stared at Marcus, trying to process what he just said. He wasn't Constance's lawyer. He was Alexander's. He'd been working for my husband this entire time, playing a role, letting Constance incriminate herself while he documented every word. Judge Hartwell leaned forward. Mr. Holloway, are you telling this court that you engaged in some kind of covert operation against Mrs. Whitmore, that you pretended to represent her while actually working against her interests? Because if so, you're describing an egregious ethical violation that could cost you your license. Marcus shook his head. Your Honor, I never entered an appearance as Mrs. Whitmore's counsel. I never filed any documents on her behalf. I never signed a retainer agreement or accepted payment from her. What I did was respond when she contacted me 3 weeks ago looking for an attorney who could help her contest her son's estate. I met with her. I listened to her plans. I advised her on procedure and strategy. And I documented everything because that's exactly what Mr. Whitmore hired me to do. He predicted, almost to the word, what his mother would say and do. He told me she'd claim undue influence, that she'd bring family members to testify against his wife, that she'd perform grief while actually performing theft. And he wanted proof. The judge picked up the trust document, flipped to a section near the back. Read for a moment. Dobmer. Holloway is listed here as successor trustee in the event that the corporate trustee is unable or unwilling to serve. Is that correct, Murdad Chen? The trust administrator nodded. Correct, Your Honor. Dobmer. Holloway was appointed by Mr. Whitmore specifically because of his experience with contentious estate litigation. He was tasked with protecting the trust from hostile challenges and documenting any attempts to circumvent the grantor's wishes. Everything he's done has been in service of that role. I found my voice. You've been recording her this whole time? Marcus finally looked at me. His expression was apologetic. Almost. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm sorry this had to happen this way. But yes, every conversation, every meeting, every phone call. Your husband knew his mother would come for you, and he knew she'd need a lawyer. So he made sure that when she went looking, she'd find me. I made myself easy to locate, made sure my name came up in searches for estate litigation attorneys. And when she called, I said yes. Not because I agreed with her, because your husband paid me very well to document her intentions. Judge Hartwell held up her hand. Dobmer. Holloway, I need to understand the scope of this. What exactly have you recorded? Marcus opened his folder. Your Honor, I have recordings of 6 meetings with Mrs. Whitmore over the past 3 weeks, all recorded with her knowledge and consent. Virginia is a one-party consent state, and I informed her at our first meeting that I record all client consultations for accuracy. She signed an acknowledgement. She knew she was being recorded. She just didn't know why. He pulled out a stack of papers, transcripts. I also have text messages, emails, and voicemails, all preserved, all authenticated, all admissible. The judge looked at the transcripts. What do they contain? Marcus's voice remained professional. Neutral. They contain Mrs. Whitmore's stated intentions. Your Honor, her plans to claim the house before Mrs. Celeste Whitmore could secure it, her instructions to hire a locksmith to access the safe, her discussion of which family members could be convinced to testify against her daughter-in-law, and what she was willing to pay them for their cooperation, her explicit statement that she intended to, and I quote, clean out the house before the widow knows what's happening, end quote. I felt sick. Not shocked exactly. I'd known Constance hated me, but hearing that she planned it all so carefully, so deliberately, made it real in a way that her courtroom performance hadn't. Mr. Holloway, were any of the witnesses Mrs. Whitmore brought today paid for their testimony? Marcus flipped to a tab section. Yes, Your Honor. Aunt Margaret received $10,000 2 weeks ago, deposited directly into her checking account from Mrs. Whitmore's personal funds. The memo line said family support, but Mrs. Whitmore told me explicitly it was payment for testimony. Cousin Philip received $15,000 and a promise of more if the case was successful. Mrs. Whitmore referred to it as incentivizing cooperation. Both witnesses knew they were being paid to testify against Mrs. Celeste Whitmore. Both agreed to misrepresent their relationships with Alexander and to claim they'd witnessed behavior they had not witnessed. Judge Hartwell set down her pen, looked to the gallery where Margaret and Philip had been sitting. They were gone. Must have left when Constance did. Smart. Because what Marcus was describing wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Witness tampering, subornation of perjury, fraud upon the court. Your Honor, Marcus continued, I also have recordings of Mrs. Whitmore discussing how to make the manipulation narrative more believable. She specifically coached the witnesses on what to say, told them to mention isolation and personality changes, told them to cry if possible because judges respond to emotion. She treated this like a performance. And she was the director. I thought about that. About coming home to find the locks changed. My clothes on the lawn. Every trace of my life with Alexander erased because his mother couldn't tolerate my existence. Constance hadn't just wanted the assets. She wanted to erase me. Judge Hartwell closed the folder. Mer. Holloway, I'm going to ask you directly. In your professional opinion, based on everything you documented, was Mrs. Whitmore motivated by legitimate concern for her son's estate or by malice toward his widow? Marcus met her eyes. Malice, Your Honor. Unquestionably. She never once mentioned her son except as a possession that had been taken from her. She never grieved, never cried except when practicing for court. She referred to Mrs. Celeste Whitmore as the interloper and that woman. This was never about protecting Alexander's legacy. It was about punishing the woman he loved more than he loved his mother. And that's when the judge delivered the sentence that ended her. Judge Patricia Hartwell arranged the documents before her with deliberate care. The trust certification, the letter, the transcripts, Alexander's recorded predictions laid out next to Constance's recorded confessions. She looked at each person remaining in the courtroom. Me. Marcus Holloway, Richard Chen from the bank. Then she spoke with the kind of finality that changes lives. Based on the evidence presented today, I am denying the petition of Constance Whitmore in its entirety. The emergency motion for transfer of assets is denied. The motion for eviction is denied. All claims against Celeste Whitmore are dismissed with prejudice, meaning they cannot be refiled. The Alexander James Whitmore Irrevocable Trust is recognized as valid and enforceable. The no contest clause is hereby activated. Constance Whitmore has forfeited all benefits under said trust, and is deemed to have no legal or equitable interest in any assets held therein. She struck the gavel once. The sound echoed in the quiet courtroom like a door closing forever. Furthermore, I am issuing an order to show cause. Mrs. Constance Whitmore is ordered to appear before this court in 30 days to explain why she should not be held in contempt for bringing false testimony before this court. I am also referring the following matters to the Commonwealth's Attorney for criminal investigation. First, possible elder abuse for the February incident involving attempted coercion of legal documents from a dying man. Second, witness tampering and subornation of perjury for payments made to Margaret Whitmore and Philip Whitmore in exchange for false testimony. Third, fraud upon the court for knowingly presenting fabricated evidence under oath. Marcus made notes. These weren't suggestions. They were formal referrals that would trigger investigations. Constance had come into this courtroom wearing Chanel and pearls, draped in respectability. She'd leave under the shadow of criminal charges that no amount of social standing could erase. I am also issuing a permanent protective order. Constance Whitmore is prohibited from contacting, approaching, or communicating with Celeste Whitmore through any means, direct or indirect. Violation of this order is grounds for immediate arrest. Richard Chen stood. Your Honor, on behalf of Hawthorne National Bank as corporate trustee, we will proceed with distribution of trust assets to Mrs. Celeste Whitmore according to the terms specified by the grantor. We will cooperate fully with any criminal investigations. Judge Hartwell nodded. Thank you, Chen. Mrs. Whitmore. She looked at me directly. Your husband loved you very much. What he built to protect you is extraordinary. You're free to go home. You're free to grieve without looking over your shoulder. You're free to build whatever life comes next. I'm sorry you had to fight for that freedom in this courtroom. I stood on shaky legs. Thank you, Your Honor, for listening, for seeing through the performance, for giving Alexander's plan time to work. She gave me a small, sad smile. Truth has a way of emerging, Mrs. Whitmore. Your husband made sure the truth had a voice. That's rare. That's love. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck one final time, and it was over. 3 years have passed since that Tuesday in probate court. 3 years since I walked out of that courthouse into bright autumn sunlight feeling like I'd survived something I didn't quite understand. The protective order remains in place. Constance never challenged it, never tried to contact me. The Commonwealth's attorney did investigate. Margaret and Philip both received probation and fines for perjury. Constance herself was charged with witness tampering and fraud. She pleaded guilty to reduced charges, paid substantial fines, did community service at a legal aid clinic. The Whitmore family fractured after that. Some sided with Constance. Others, the ones who quietly disliked her imperious behavior for decades, distanced themselves. She lost her position on several charity boards, lost her standing in the country club, not because anyone officially removed her, but because people simply stopped inviting her to things. The Whisper Network had decided she'd gone too far. I learned through distant connections that she'd sold them a clean house, the one she'd expected to inherit. She moved to a small apartment in Arlington. Nothing wrong with it, nothing shameful, but a far cry from the estate she'd occupied for decades. She gambled $4.5 million on pride and lost. And the loss wasn't just financial, it was social. Familial. The cost of being proven publicly to be exactly what Alexander had said she was. As for me, I stayed in the house Alexander and I shared, the one Constance tried to take. I repainted the bedroom, changed some furniture, made it mine in ways I couldn't while grieving. But I kept the important things, his books with annotations in the margins, the photograph from our honeymoon, the coffee maker he programmed to start at 6:15 every morning. I built a life slowly. A life that honored what we'd had without being trapped by what I lost. I went back to work, threw myself into nonprofit development with renewed purpose. Alexander's trust included provisions for charitable giving, and I've used them. Funded scholarships, supported cancer research, donated to organizations that help widows navigate estate law so they don't have to fight alone the way I did. People ask me sometimes if I hate Constance, if I lie awake thinking about revenge. The answer is no. I feel sorry for her. She spent 70 years building walls around herself, walls of respectability and propriety and carefully controlled image. And in the end, those walls became a prison. She lost her son twice, once to death, once to the truth about who she really was. She could have had $4.5 million, could have honored Alexander's wishes, could have chosen grace over greed. But she couldn't. Her need to win was stronger than her love, and that's its own punishment. I visit Alexander's grave once a month. It's in a quiet cemetery in Fairfax. Simple headstone, his name, his dates, and the line I chose, beloved husband who loved fiercely and protected completely. I bring flowers, sit on the grass, tell him about my life, about the scholarship recipients, about the garden I planted, about the trip I took to Scotland because we'd always planned to go together. And I thank him, every single time, for seeing what was coming, for building protections I didn't know I needed, for loving me enough to plan beyond his own death. Alexander used to say that love wasn't just feeling, it was action. It was showing up. It was making choices that put the other person's well-being first. He showed me that love in our 7 years together, and in his final weeks, when he could barely stay awake, when pain was his constant companion, he used what energy remained to protect me one last time. Not with words or promises. With trusts and clauses and attorneys planted like landmines under his mother's carefully laid plans. That was love. The practical kind. The kind that anticipates danger and builds walls against it. The kind that says I won't always be here, but I can make sure you're safe anyway. Justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like an irrevocable trust with a no contest clause. Sometimes it looks like a planted attorney documenting everything. Sometimes it looks like a letter written from a deathbed that predicts the future, with painful accuracy. Sometimes justice is just loving someone enough to protect them even when you're gone. Alexander protected me from the grave, gave me tools I didn't know how to use until I needed them, made sure truth had a voice louder than lies. That's not revenge. That's love beyond death. I stood at his grave last week, late afternoon, the light golden and soft, placed white roses on the grass, the kind he used to bring me on Fridays, and I whispered what I whisper every time. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for loving me enough to plan for a future you wouldn't be part of. I understand now. Love doesn't end with death. It plans beyond it. It builds walls and sets traps, and writes letters that speak when voices can't. The sun set behind the trees. I stood, brushed grass from my skirt, walked back to my car, drove home to the house that's mine because Alexander made sure it would be. Constance tried to bury me. Instead, she buried herself. And I'm still here, still standing, still building a life worth living. Not because I won some legal battle. Because the man I love saw me clearly enough to protect me from people who never would. Alexander Whitmore died 3 years ago. But his love is still here. Still working. Still keeping me safe. And that's enough. If this story touched you, what's your biggest takeaway? Thanks for watching.